So thank you guys for having us today. We really appreciate you taking the time. My name's Kevin Wright, and this is Joe Nickel. We are with Yard & Company. We are a national urban growth firm based here out of Cincinnati. We are designers and planners and redevelopment strategists who've been doing a lot of work recently helping cities think through reopening as we enter the new phases of reopening during COVID-19. I think we were brought here today to talk about our perspective and what we're seeing and what we're working on nationally and how that might apply to Cincinnati. These are some of the discussion points that we're going to touch on. We'll try to get to Q&A as quickly as possible, and we can really take it wherever you'd like us to go. What we're seeing from a countrywide perspective, and in several places we're working, are focusing on health and safety, restitching social and community fabric, and frankly the events of the last week or so have put a further priority on that. Public space prioritization, and planning for the next 18 to 36 months. So first off, safe and clean equals customers. We're helping Norfolk, Virginia right now do a citywide reopening strategy. We recently conducted a survey of customers frequenting businesses, hospitals, and on. In Norfolk, we engaged about 1,200 people on that survey. One of the responses that was overwhelming was that folks are making decisions on where to go based on clean and safe. In other words, is there hand sanitizer? Are people wearing masks? Is there signage clearly indicating the protocols in place to keep people safe? Even down to customers or definitely employees being tested for symptoms before entering. So that was really eye-opening for us, so I just want to make sure that we emphasize that is kind of at ground level, at the base level, something that needs to be done before anything else really can work. In that same conversation, we started developing these posters. I'm going to go through these pretty quickly here for how to illustrate to customers and businesses, and really the city at large, what the different phases of reopening look like in Virginia. It's very similar to Ohio and Kentucky. So this is an example of phase 0 of a customer-facing poster that would show that in phase 0, essential businesses and employees only, so think about this as delivery of services from a restaurant or a bar or a local retailer. Phase 1 is a step above that. It takes you to the space where you are actually doing carryout and pickup. Phase 2 this is the phase that we've been entering here in Cincinnati recently, which is where the business owner starts to rethink spaces that have typically been devoted to the car and think about them more as a multi-use flex space. So you can see on the left-hand side of this image where parking spaces are being used for outdoor seating or pickup. The parking lot in front and the parking lot to the side are spatially distanced for customers to sit outside and even enjoy music or a food truck. And then what's really interesting about this is that we're seeing business owners and property owners around the country start to think through both temporarily how you reuse these spaces that have been traditionally devoted only to the car, and think about how to do more longer-term or medium-term investment into these spaces to keep them as outdoor seating, outdoor dining, outdoor shopping. This is an example that we designed for a parking lot here in Cincinnati, where you can see how you might fit people into a space that is spatially distanced with a stage, with lighting, with kind of a soft barrier around the space to kind of elongate clear entries in and out of the space to keep people healthy and safe. The second topic here is that we need to see our neighbors. And so I think across the country we've been seeing that there's been a focus on downtown and downtown near neighborhoods. Typically, and Cincinnati is no different, those neighborhoods around the core or in the core have more resources than our other more residential-based neighborhoods. As those places have started to figure out how to reopen, many of our clients and partners are starting to think about what the neighborhood scenes start to look like, and it does look differently. This is an example of a project where essentially we brought all aspects of the neighborhood out into one space for people to enjoy. What's exciting about this is creating an opportunity to rethink what summer youth programs look like for teens, what the rec center looks like, what the library looks like, and creating these culturally relevant spaces for neighborhoods to allow those amenities to remain open, Those are a huge service to our residents in our neighborhoods, particularly those in underserved neighborhoods who rely on these to really stay afloat throughout the summer. And so as we're starting to think beyond the downtown, beyond the core, we're starting to think about streets, parks, parking lots, sidewalks, and how to reallocate those to some of those social resources. So in this image, you can see everything from outdoor fitness, games, family-oriented concerts, movie nights, down to the library and food and beverage activations. Some imagery of what that might look like. I think one of the themes of this presentation you'll see from us is that this doesn't necessarily require a lot of money, at least not in the sense of these big grandiose budgets that you all are in the process of talking about this month. So you can see in this image here, we have designed kind of a former cable spool as table, people sitting on buckets and interacting with the space without a big investment. Same with the library. So you can see in this image, this is an image from Dallas. On the left there is just books on a shelf. Those are movable, they're on wheels, and can be taken in and out as a space is activated. And then here's an image out of Fort Wayne, Indiana that is indicative of the kind of recreation or programming you would see in a rec center being brought out into the street. Third topic, equitable outdoor movement is essential. So this is about streets. Our streets in Cincinnati, Councilmember Pastor touched on this a bit, are inequitable. There's really no other way to talk about it. They act as dividers through our neighborhoods. This is MLK, which cuts through several neighborhoods. This is MLK at the intersection of Avondale and Walnut Hills. It's virtually uncrossable for pedestrians. It creates literal divides in neighborhoods. If you look at the data, and you probably have, you can see that on one side of, say, Victory Parkway or one side of Gilbert in Walnut Hills has entirely different racial and socioeconomic data than the other side. And so these not only are not safe for people walking to work, biking to work, going to the rec center, the library, the school, they're literally creating an equity gap.
Mr.
Yep.
Wright, I was about to call you something else. I wanted to say what I think needs to be said is that these neighborhoods that you've shown, whether it's Martin Luther King, whether it's Walnut Hills, whether it's Liberty Street, which is now under some sort of construction, are working class white and black neighborhoods. Working class, because we didn't even show the west side of town. Mm-hmm. You know, these are working class white and black neighborhoods, and this has existed for a number of years, even with the interstate system. This is not a Republican, Democrat, white, black issue. This is a class issue, and I think that is now that the attention is being put here on the city of Cincinnati, these are some of the discussions that we need to have in our neighborhoods where I grew up in, right? Neighborhoods that are babies on the west side. A large portion of Cincinnatians live on the west side of town, and they have these type of roads that are just impassable. Harrison Avenue comes to mind, and everyone is refusing to talk about it. But these are critical issues now that we're talking about. Black Lives Matter and all these other things. These are the neighborhoods that parents and children have to raise their families in. So I just wanted to make that point.
Thank you. I think it's an important point, and from our perspective, what we've seen nationally in other cities is that it is not a political issue. We've seen Republicans, Democrats, and on in leadership positions adopt these policies. So this is an image of what that might look like from a bike lane perspective. This was an initiative where we had 20 volunteers install 7,000 linear feet of bike lanes in a day. Now, you could replace this bike lane with an expanded sidewalk. You could replace it with a bus-only lane. There are several ways to think about this, so don't think about this as only about bikes. But really what it's about is shrinking the street to make it safer for pedestrians and not giving all of that space away only to the automobile driver. I would say too, you mentioned the west side. We've done some work in Westwood, and you see this in several neighborhoods where a brewery or a restaurant might open up, and it's the first restaurant or retailer to open up in quite some time, and then you get a lot of customers coming to that crossing a busy street. And to be nimble enough as a city to install a crosswalk quickly and to be able to react quickly from a transportation perspective is critical. This is an example of a parking space being taken over by outdoor dining, which you all have been doing some of that here in downtown and over the Rhine. And this is an example right next to a school that we recently installed, where you have the school behind the photo, and on drop-off and pickup times for the school, cars fly down the street. It creates an unsafe situation for the kids, and so we've shrunk the street down to create a bump out for more pedestrian space and painted a much more visible, wider crosswalk. And here's some image nationally. I think one thing a seed we want to plant is the idea of open streets and connector streets. With people staying at home more, that means they're getting out more. People are recreating more, they're walking more, they're biking more, and the appetite for walking typically is a mile. We think in today's age, with all that's going on, it's more like 3 miles. And so when you start thinking about streets, I'll mention them again, Victory Parkway and Gilbert, Reading, that connect multiple neighborhoods together. If you start thinking strategically about those streets as open streets or even shrunk streets where people can safely walk from business district to business district through a city, get exercise, engage with their rec center, their library, and connect with local businesses, it can be very powerful. One added piece here is that this is a new guide from NACDO, which touches on COVID-19 streets. And your transportation department, I believe, adopted NACDO guidelines before all this happened. So if you take a look at that, there's an opportunity to take a close look at NACDO guidelines related to COVID-19 streets and begin thinking about how those might fit into Cincinnati. Lastly, dynamic problems require dynamic solutions. So this is not a static problem. COVID-19, this pandemic, it's going to fluctuate. We literally don't know what's going to happen next. The scientists are learning as they go. And so there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution, and it really fits into this idea of tactical urbanism and being flexible, quick, and easy, which we've touched on a little bit already. So you may bolt down something like this, which we did in Virginia, into the street to shrink the street or to create an outdoor dining or a bike lane or whatever it might be for the neighborhood, but you also need to be able to take it back up if things change. Or, conversely, make it permanent. If it's something that really works for a local business owner or for a neighborhood, be thinking about what it might mean for it to remain in place forever. This is down to even stenciling. So this is a stencil we spent about $100 on and installed in Findlay Market area with spray chalk, where it just simply says, keep your distance. It's a reminder. I don't know about you guys, but I'll walk out the door sometimes and I'll forget my mask. Sometimes I need to be reminded. Usually it's my wife that does that. We also this is kind of fun in terms of the beg button for crossing streets for pedestrians, referred to typically as the beg button. It's something you touch to indicate that you need to cross the street, but we're being told we shouldn't touch things now. So we created these signs really quickly to kick the beg button. It's also a bit of a stress reliever. We got in a little bit of trouble here with the mayor of the city because we broke one of the beg buttons, but it's still a fun idea and something to consider as kind of a bigger example of what might work in these times. I'm going to touch on just some final thoughts here to keep you guys thinking as we head out and maybe spark some conversation. Not all places have the same problems. This is kind of a tried and truism that we hold tightly to, but in these days of the pandemic, it's even more important. When you're thinking about South Cumminsville and Avondale and Walnut Hills and Over the Rhine, those are 4 totally different places. We shouldn't think they're all the same, and we shouldn't help them in exactly the same way. Public input should go beyond the screen. We're starting to see virtual commission meetings, virtual council meetings. In some ways, this is good because they can be recorded and saved online and people can watch them later. We should have probably been recording them before all this happened. But the other problem with that is that not everybody has access to internet. And so we really have to take this as a moment to go out to people, meet them where they are, pop up in their environment, and get their feedback on the future of the city. Community-based organizations will lead the recovery efforts. I implore you to, as you're thinking about the budget this coming month, to not just make draconian cuts across everyone, but think about those who can be your partners on the ground as you rebuild. I think we're gonna wake up from this whenever it's over, and we're gonna have a lot of vacancy around retail in particular in our neighborhoods we've been investing in over the last several years. And your CDCs and other social and community-based organizations are in a great position to help you think about that. Rip off the red tape. Speaking on that same kind of topic of retail and neighborhood problem solving, this is the opportunity to think about how to remove unnecessary regulations that limit creativity and limit the ability to do things like pop-up retail, pop-up streets, open streets, slow streets. There are a lot of regulations cities are exploring now to think, hey, this is a little outdated, a little antiquated. Do we really need this? Is this going to hold back growth when we come out of this moment? And kind of within that same thought process, trust your citizens, trust their creativity, and get out of their way. They know their neighborhood better than most, and if they say that they need a crosswalk, or they need an expanded sidewalk, or they need a better intersection by a school, then support them in that, believe in them, and then sanction their ability to go out there and do it themselves. They probably will need your help, but oftentimes they just need, they need the city to get out of the way. I've already touched on this a bit, but embrace as an institution, this isn't just about people in neighborhoods, this is about you all as well. Embrace the idea of quickly, rapidly prototyping ideas. This is something that kind of comes out of the private innovation sector and is being applied to cities, but embrace failure. It's okay to fail if you only spend a few $100s on a weekend. If something you install doesn't work, you uninstall it. That's a much smarter approach than spending $5 million installing something that doesn't work. And then lastly, just touching on a couple more points here and then I'll be quiet, stop planning for 20 years out. I think this is a moment that has highlighted for us that we can't predict the future. And so when we spend a lot of times doing vision plans for 20, 30 years out, it's really in many ways a waste of time to keep doing that because the world is changing so rapidly from a technology standpoint. We have the pandemic, we have national political issues, and there's no predicting that. And thinking more about the next 18 to 36 months, thinking about the now, planning for that, and using this moment to plan for the now, but to repair past inequities. In many ways, the pandemic has allowed us to hit the reset button on our policies and procedures around growth and development, and I think there's an opportunity to really reconsider what that looks like. Thank you.
Really appreciate that, Mr. Wright. I don't know if you had anything that you wanted to add, Mr. Nickel, but I think that this was an excellent presentation, actually inspiring. As lawmakers, I think that we need to hear folks like you who are on the front lines, who are doing this work every single day, and the knowledge that you have, to me, is invaluable. I want to say a couple things. On the slide number 1, you talked about public space prioritization. And Seth Maney, he loves all of this, so he's constantly feeding my intellectual curiosity, right? So he had me watch this thing, I think it's called, it was something dealing with Jane Jacobs. Yeah. And interestingly, Jane Jacobs, now she probably wouldn't be okay with some of my votes and that sort of thing, but she was a champion of walking neighborhoods, and it was a part in her documentary where she said that walking neighborhoods is actually a crime deterrent. So the more people you have out of your neighborhoods, and you say we need to see our neighbors, the more you see of your neighbors, the less likely they are to commit a crime out in the open. And if we're talking about past inequities and repairing past inequities, if I'm going to dinner, say on the west side of town, on Harrison Avenue, there's this big, huge road that's keeping me from walking this close, and I know in the pandemic we don't want to walk that close. If I'm going, say, to Hook's Fish and Chicken in Bond Hill, there's a huge Reading Road that's intersecting. If I'm going, even today, down to, I'm going to watch the Q Kids perform, and I want to go down to Lynn Street. There's a big, huge Lynn Street, huge road. I mean, I don't even think it needs to be that long. But when we're talking about past inequities, I mean, these things were by design. If I want to go and look at the historic district, the last probably remaining untouched historic district in Cincinnati, the Brighton district, the Brewery district that encompasses the West End, and I go down to Western Avenue is now 75. And we're talking about upwards of 600 to 900 structures between West End and Liberty Street that was just demolished for, you guessed it, big roads. And this is not a black issue, it's not a white issue. Ironically, it's a class issue of both black and white folks have been affected. And now 40, 50, 60 years later, I won't even say 60 years, 65 years later, you have Westwood and the west side of Cincinnati looking the way it looks because of policies, as you've described, that we've had decades ago, centuries ago, if you will, or almost a century ago, if you will, when they started planning for neighborhoods and that sort of thing. In addition to that, we talk about home ownership in the city of Cincinnati. Why is home ownership the way it is? Well, if you look like me, if you was Irish, if you was Italian, if you was Jewish, in the 30s and the 40s, you didn't get home loans. That was just a fact. You didn't get the Fannie Mae and the Freddie Mac loans. And then everybody else was assimilating, and then black folks can get it. And then we passed the Fair Housing in 1968. My grandmother was 31. My mother was 2. And when we talk about pulling yourselves up out of bootstraps, and we talk about these neighborhoods, my grandmother, my mother, they lived in these neighborhoods with disinvestment. And let's not forget Brown versus the Board of Education in 1954. My grandmother had already been through grade school, been through high school, and that sort of thing. And now we thought we were going to get investment. And these are the frustrations that I have, because the pandemic then comes and it exacerbates an already bad situation. You know, and so now we got housing issues. We got, in my opinion, we got zoning code issues. I mean, we have classist issues, we have racist issues, and it seems to me that the only thing that we're doing is making this a Democrat and Republican issue. And most of the people who are making this a Democrat and Republican issue didn't grow up like me. You know, I grew up in Carthage watching the destruction of our neighborhood, just watching people leave Carthage, and then Carthage just literally just declining significantly. And my mother's property values just declining, and all the working class people who their pride and joy was purchasing a home is just declining. And so when I see your presentation, if I am a citizen, right, the first, and I'm saying what folks have said to me, they hear gentrification. Oh my God, we can't have that in this neighborhood without us being moved out. That is crazy for Cincinnatians to even feel that way, that we can't invest in, you know, shrinking our roads, invest in walkable neighborhoods without that being code word for we're going to gentrify the working class whites and blacks, and we're going to move them to the suburbs, and we already have poor transportation, by the way. Speaking of transportation, it was Republicans who've championed over and over and over again at one time or another in the 50s and the 40s, they championed transportation. Because the idea is that I want to get you from your home to your job and that sort of thing. I had an opportunity to go to Seattle, right? It's very difficult. I mean, the cost of living is extraordinarily high, but it's very difficult for you. You have a hard excuse not going out to, say, the county to get to a job, because they have light rail, they have transportation, they have bus-only lanes, they have bike lanes, they have all these things. So if you're a working class person in Seattle, Washington, or Portland, Oregon, better example, that you can leave your house and take the train or take the bus and get downtown in less than 15 minutes. You can be, 15 miles out. Seth Maney, who lives in Clifton, right? There are so many stops between Clifton and downtown that is ridiculous. Now think about someone who's not Seth Maney, a mother who needs to get to her doctor's appointment, you know, who already lives in a segregated, horrible neighborhood, you know, not walkable, not those things. There's no restaurants around, there are no grocery stores around, and she has to get to work. I don't want to belabor the point, but the point that I'm trying to highlight is that this pandemic, hopefully, you know, shed some light on the plight of working class people in our city. You know, hopefully that now people are seeing these folks protest, that it's just not a protest about, you know, the need for more accountability, the need for oversight and that sort of thing. But these are working class people who are saying we're tired. That we had to protest people storming the Capitol because folks are just tired. You know what I mean? You're telling the folks to sit at home for $1,200 in neighborhoods that have seen significant disinvestment, both white and black, and then you tell them you only get $1,200. But everybody else get trillions of dollars and billions of dollars and that sort of thing. And I just wish that there were more voices on this side of the aisle, on this side of the dais, that are speaking out and saying that this is a powder keg in this city, and it's a class powder keg that's waiting to happen. And if we don't invest in walkable neighborhoods, you know what I mean, maybe crime increases. If we don't invest, you know what I mean, in things that are important to working class people, housing that people can own, you know what I mean, and that we don't deconcentrate poverty, that we're going to see an America that is just unrecognizable. So with that, because I see Antonio back there, he tapped me. It's time for me to go. Any members of council or any visiting member of council would like to ask these gentlemen questions? Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Thank you.
I was just going to say, I really enjoyed that presentation, and it was kind of shocking when you said, let's not look 20 years out, because, you know, every planning session always goes with, where do we want to be in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, and you're saying, don't do that. So that was a whole different way of looking at this. Things are going to change, so, but very interesting. Thank you for that.
I wanted to add one more thing. There's a group out there, by the way, for those who are listening, called Urban Hikers, and these are African-American men who have taken up the challenge to get other, and their quota is urban kids, white, black, and Hispanic in the city of Cincinnati, to start walking their neighborhoods. And these young men, they walk like miles. They'll go from here all the way to Kentucky, and they'll walk back. But the idea is to get people to appreciate their neighborhoods. I know that me and trying to get my wife, I think that's going to be a challenge. I'm going to start walking with these urban hikers. I would love to connect them with you guys. They've created a documentary. They walked the Appalachian Trail. I think it was 65 miles, but they want to bring that here to the city of Cincinnati and get our young people who can pick up trash along the hike, to get them engaged in walking our neighborhoods. And they want to start on the west side of Cincinnati. And so more to come, but I would like my office to get with you so we can connect you two together. So I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me. Yes, Mr. Young.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple things. One, I just want to say hello to Kevin. Good to see you again. Secondly, I too am intrigued about the not planning 20 years out. I'm not aware of government being able to be nimble enough, quick enough, to plan for the short term in a meaningful way. So could you expound a little bit on what it's going to take for a government to be able to plan, say, 2 years out? Is that what you said? I think you said 18 months. To be able to plan, what's that government going to look like? How does it make itself flexible enough to put money in place, to put people, I guess, and projects in place in that short period of time?
Well, I'm gonna let Joe expound on that part. I will add, before passing it off to him, because you're probably sick of hearing my voice, but I will add that while I did knock the vision plan or the comp plan a little bit, I would say that it is important to have values, right? It is important to say, here are the things we value regionally or as a city, and that we want to move the needle on. I would guess that and hope that you already have that, but I think it's important to establish those before you really can get into what Joe's going to talk about.
Yeah, we like to say that you got to have your North Star, right? You have to kind of know where you generally want to go, but operating here and now is important. I'd say a couple examples that you could look at for how governments, particularly local governments, city governments, are able to act nimbly. The city of Oakland, California, very similar size to Cincinnati, albeit in a bigger region, opened up to pedestrians 80 miles of streets for peds, bikes, expanded transit in 3 days. They were able to do it in 3 days. The city of Norfolk that Kevin mentioned was able to pivot and mobilize the Open Norfolk plan in 7 days. The city of Cincinnati, you all were able to come together very quickly and come to the assistance of retailers to rethink how certain streets might be used in the COVID era. So I think there's precedent out there for how to come together and to act nimbly. And then I think from more of a planning perspective, I know that it's happened here and it's happened elsewhere, to really kind of reset the planning window to be in that 18 to 36 month time horizon, so that we can't hide behind a 20-year vision when really we need to act now, in the next 2 months, in the next 3 months. So it's kind of resetting the bracket for how you think of planning. Does that get at your question, Councilman?
I would add too, just if this helps, what we have also seen is in certain cities, I think Memphis was one of these at one point, where there are innovation teams of really smart people, might only be 5, and they float between departments, and they're essentially problem solvers. And they have the power or the wherewithal of the city manager or the mayor, depending on the structure. And if there's a problem that needs to be solved, they creatively help solve it, and they go to the different departments and pull the resources that are needed from there. So some kind of empowered team can often be a good way to approach that as well.
Thank you,
Great.
you,
See you
Kevin
again.
and Joe. Really appreciate you. You're welcome back anytime.
Appreciate it.
Please get my office. I want to link you all up with urban hikers. Maybe y'all
Great.
come out and hike with me.
That'd be fun.
Okay.
That's excellent. Moving to our agenda. Excuse me. Item number 1 is a report regarding the administration working with the Daughters of St. Elias to remedy issues related to the renovation. I want to say to the city administration, Alex Peppers and your department, and Mr. Art Dahlberg, I didn't know if you want to come speak on it briefly. Please, you're more than welcome to do so, but I know that the city has been extraordinarily responsive to the wonderful work that the nuns are doing at St. Elias. But if you could kind of give us a kind of brief recap and where we stand now, that would be great.
Yeah, I'll try not to take too much time. For the record, my name is Art Dahlberg, Director of Buildings and Inspections. While this started about 2.5 years ago because of a contractor who didn't follow the requirements of the permit, which was to replace these arch windows in kind, he ended up taking them out and replaced them with rectangular windows. Since then, they've decided to take the old windows that fortunately they had stored in the basement, and they're rehabbing those windows. And by the 19th of this month, they say that they should have them put back in the building. We had given them a temporary certificate of occupancy that's going to expire at the end of this month. We'll monitor it closely. If they need an extension of time off of that temporary certificate of occupancy, we'll do it. Good news is it's working out. So thank you.
Mr. Dahlberg, you did an extraordinary job. When we first got here, started this issue, they thought that nuns were going to get arrested and they were going to jail. And I said, Mr. Dahlberg does not want to send anyone to jail. No. But we do sincerely appreciate you, city manager, and its entire administration for coming to a happy medium and coming to a resolution. I think that the nuns that are working there, I think they've added some nuns to the space. I think they're doing an extraordinary job. They're bringing back to life a building that was just laying there, dilapidated. And from what I hear, they're a positive force on that street for a lot of people. So thank you. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for your kind words.
Probably. Without objection, I would like to file item number 1. Item number 2 is report regarding the feasibility of closing Ford Avenue. As you know, that the residents want street calming measures there. Without objection, we will file the report. Item number 3 is the motion to actually get the administration to move on this issue. I am personally in support. As the report says, that if there's no objection from fire and police, that the Department of Transportation and Engineering will disseminate a survey amongst the residents. With that, I am supportive. Do we have anyone here who want to speak to that from transportation? No. If you don't need to, if you don't want to, but if you, great. Roll call vote on item number 3.
Councilmember Pastor?
Yes.
Councilmember Young?
Yes.
Councilmember Sunderman?
Yes.
Thank you. Item number 4 is a motion submitted by my office to honor Mr. Howard Champion Jr. He was an African-American leader in Avondale. He opened up, I think, the first washing or the laundromat there on Burnett and Forest. So his birthday is coming up. A pillar, again, in the community, not just the Avondale community, not just the African-American community, but in the business community for his contributions. They're going to give that area a secondary honorary name of Howard Champion Jr. Roll call vote on item number 4.
Councilmember Pastor?
Yes.
Councilmember Young?
Yes.
Councilmember Sunderman?
Yes.
Perfect. Are there any other items that we need to address, Madam Clerk? Okay, with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.